So if you're looking to buy an iPad for school or just note-taking in general, or even for sketching, then you're in the right place, because in this video, I'm going to talk about 3 popular options, one of which you're probably already considering, and I'll tell you which iPad is actually the best for you and why. And I can almost guarantee you that the one you think is the best might not actually be the best. So first up, I want to start with the most basic iPad that you can get brand new from Apple right now. It's the 11th gen iPad, also known as the A16 iPad. This will cost you $350 just for the iPad. No Apple Pencil, no keyboard, nothing. But as a student, you will almost need an Apple Pencil. So an Apple Pencil USB-C will be another $80. If you get the first generation, it would be $100. So in total, you're looking at about $450 for this entire package. Now, if you are actually going to buy these, pro tip, don't get them from Apple and check elsewhere first, like Amazon or Walmart, because you might be able to save some money. But should you get this? Well, I'll let you decide. When it comes to the design, you might think this is identical to the iPad Air design because it looks the same, but it's actually not. It's about 1 millimeter thicker than the iPad Air, which is noticeable, but this also means that 1, it won't fit a case that's made for the iPad Air, and 2, it just doesn't feel as sleek and as premium as this. I've also noticed that while using this iPad, the screen actually flexes quite a bit. So while using it for note-taking, you can actually feel the screen kind of like bending inside as you put pressure with your Apple Pencil. And that's not really a great feeling. I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker, but you can feel it on the iPad Air, so it's a much better writing experience over here. But the screen itself is actually very similar to the iPad Air. It's the same size, same resolution, so it's just as sharp, and it gets equally bright, goes all the way up to 500 nits, which I think is enough for using it indoors, which is where I think you'll be note-taking most of the times. It's also good enough for content consumption, so maybe occasionally watching movies, videos, or just lectures on the go, because it also has good speakers. Now, when it comes to the Apple Pencil, this is where things start to differ quite a bit between the base model iPads and the Air models. The base model iPad does not support the Apple Pencil Pro version. However, this does support the Apple Pencil USB-C, which is what I have here, and the first generation Apple Pencil. And the differences between the two are few, but big, I think. So the biggest difference I think the USB-C version is missing is pressure sensitivity. So regardless of how hard or light you press on the screen while writing, it won't be able to detect that. So your stroke will be the same thickness. And I think this is a pretty big deal for especially sketching, but also just writing in general, because if you have that pressure sensitivity, it just makes the pencil feel so much more natural, just like an actual pencil, because the lighter you press, the strokes tend to be light, and the harder you press, they tend to be a bit thicker. But this is probably enough for note-taking. And it does also attach to the iPad magnetically, like that. And so you can see, but the first generation does not, and both of them have to be charged using a wire. So to be honest, I just don't think this pencil is worth getting at all. I think it'd be much better off just getting a third-party pencil from Amazon that also sticks to your iPad magnetically and probably has more features, including pressure sensitivity. Now, speaking of the Apple Pencil, since note-taking is primarily what you will be doing as a student, I would recommend you get a screen protector by Paperlike, because 1, it will protect your iPad screen from scratches when you throw it in your backpack with other things in there, which is kind of inevitable. And 2, most importantly, it actually significantly improves the writing experience on the iPad, because it makes it feel like writing on real paper. And to be honest with you, before I had used these, I thought they were a bit overrated, but after having used these for a while, I actually think they make a big difference, because they use something called nanodot technology, which adds just the right amount of resistance to the Apple Pencil to give you a lot more control over your strokes, versus just writing on glass where your Apple Pencil can kind of randomly just slide around. It's also super easy to install if you watch the video from Paperlike, and you get 2 in the box just in case you mess up. So I'll leave links below, check it out. If you really don't like it, you can return it within 100 days. You have nothing to lose. Now, getting back to the iPad, as the name suggests, this is the A16 iPad, so this has the A16 processor inside, which is the same one you'll find in an iPhone 14 Pro. And that is actually a problem, because this is one of the very few Apple devices I have ever used that actually lags. And this is the latest one. It's not like 5-year-old. So while using the Good Notes app on this during an exam, I noticed that my strokes started lagging, and it was so bad that my writing wasn't even legible. And that was the work that I had to submit to my professor for them to mark it. So there was no way I could have submitted that. So I had to go back and erase that and then write slowly to make sure it was at least readable. And that is something that I have never ever experienced on my older iPad, and this is 5 years old. So just something you might want to consider if you're going to buy this, because I was just note taking. I wasn't doing any intensive gaming or anything. You know, it's one of the basic tasks you can do, just taking notes, and it started lagging. Could totally be good notes just glitching out, but I thought it's worth mentioning. The other issue with the processor is that this iPad does not have Apple Intelligence. Now, while those features, Apple Intelligence features, are not good right now, they're just a joke at the moment, but when they do get better, hopefully they do in a year or two, you will never have access to any of them. This means you won't get any writing tools like being able to summarize things in proofread text, and the smarter version of Siri to quickly ask questions on topics that you're working on. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that if you want to use any iPad with an external monitor, you can connect it using the USB-C port. However, on the A16 iPad, it just mirrors the screen, which I don't think is very useful. However, on the M3 iPad, as long as you connect it to a keyboard and a mouse, you can actually use the monitor like a real external display. So you can see, there you go, my iPad screen and an external monitor connected to it. You can see my mouse over here and my keyboard right here. Works. And I think this is a really nice feature to have, especially if you're planning to use your iPad like a MacBook as well, which will be a lot more possible with iPad OS 26. And you can do this external monitor thing with any iPad that has an M processor, not any other ones. On the good side though, one of the things that this iPad does get right is battery life. So I was able to use it for, again, note taking for about 3 hours, and it went from 80 to 50% battery, and then another 4 hours of use later, it went to 9% battery, which I think is more than enough. You won't have to worry about the battery life as long as you're charging it at least once every day or two. So what do you think? Does this package seem like a good deal for $450? For me, the answer is no. So obviously, the next best logical thing seems to just spend more, upgrade to the iPad Air, which, to be fair, does solve all the issues that I mentioned with this. For example, it has better build quality, slimmer design, has a better screen, it doesn't have that flex, it has Apple Intelligence because it has an M3 chip inside, and because of that, you also would never have to worry about it slowing down or lagging, especially for note-taking, and it supports Apple Pencil Pro, which has way more features than the USB-C version. However, you do have to pay a lot more, $800 for the iPad and $130 for the Apple Pencil, which I don't think is a good deal for a student. I just don't think it's realistic for a student to spend close to $900 on a writing device. So let me introduce you to the iPad Air 5, the 5th generation iPad with the M1 processor. You can buy that from Apple refurbished for $380 or around $310 from Amazon, and get the 2nd generation Apple Pencil for $130 to $100 depending on where you get it from. So for about $410, if you look at the lower end, I just don't think you can find a better deal for this package. And it basically has everything I like about the M3 iPad, including the new slimmer design, better screen, and Apple Intelligence because of the M1 chip inside, which is the same one in my MacBook. It's literally a laptop grade chip. This has it inside it. So there's no way it's gonna lag. You might even be able to find it cheaper than the prices I mentioned, especially if you're okay with getting a used one. So that's the one I think you should be getting. That's the one I would get if I were to buy an iPad again. Currently, I'm using an iPad Air 4, which is 1 generation older than the 5th generation that I just mentioned, but this one is starting to show its age, I think. And just so you know, I typically don't like to recommend things that I haven't used and tested myself. However, the iPad Air 5, which I haven't used, I can recommend comfortably because I have used the Air 4, which is a generation before that. I have used the M2, which is the generation after that. I've used the M3, which is the one after that one. And I have used the M1 processor for years, which is the processor inside that iPad. So I think I have a pretty good idea, and I'm very confident that it will be a really good buy. Now, if you're also looking to buy a laptop for school or just light work in general, this is the video I would recommend you check out, and I'll see you there.